Welcome back, everyone. If you could please take your seats again, we would like to proceed now with our program. Thank you very much. I hope you all had a very nice break and you used the break already to network a bit and get to know each other. It is now my pleasure to announce the GLEX 2021 Next Generation Plenary, titled International Collaboration for Sustainable Space Exploration, a topic that I know is very close to the heart of the next generation. I'm very pleased to welcome here with me Mr. Antonino Salmieri, lead of the EAGLE team on lunar governance at the Space Generation Advisory Council, and he will be your moderator, our moderator for this plenary. Antonino, please.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it is a great honor and pleasure to be here today. And I would like to begin by thanking, on behalf of Space Generation Advisory Council, first of all, our wonderful host, Roscosmos Space Corporation, and the city of St. Petersburg for their wonderful welcoming. And of course, the International Astronautical Federation for organizing the activities of GLEX. And we are so delighted to be here in person again, finally gathering after more than 1 year of difficult times, let's say. I also want to acknowledge the Young Force Commission 1 professional who organized the activities of this next generation with us today. And I'm very happy to be here with 6 wonderful panelists representing equally the next generation and the young professionals. And today we will have 3 parts of our program. The first part will be a plenary discussion that Chris just introduced. Then, based on that discussion, we will go in working groups during the afternoon session. And then finally, we will have a closing session where each working group will present the conclusions and the thoughts that they developed during their session. And finally, we will have some closing remarks from the president of the International Astronautical Federation. And last but not least, obviously, we will then conclude the event with some networking at the beautiful planetarium in the evening. So without further ado, I would like to begin by introducing our 6 speakers. The purpose of today is to discuss sustainability, which is a great topic and a crucial one for the next generation, and I would say for the future of space exploration in general. So we hope that we can dive into a very interesting discussion on how international cooperation, but also the role of the young generation, can foster and promote the sustainability we need to make space more accessible, to what is called democratize access to space, and to make and to push the boundaries of space even further. So today, we're joined by Dr. Simonetta Di Pippo, the director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, Dr. Sergei Kikalev, the special advisor to the Director General of Roscosmos, Hassan Al-Mansouri, the first UAE astronaut at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, Dr. Julie Patanen-Yosek, lecturer at the State University, Priyanka Das, PhD student at the Institut Supérieur de l'Aéronautique et de l'Espace, and finally, Ignatiy Romanov-Chernikovsky, software engineer at Space Products and Innovation. To make this a little bit more personal, I will like now to give the floor to our speakers so they will introduce themselves and give very few remarks on how their career is connected to space exploration and to the topic of sustainability, and then we will begin with the actual discussion. Before I do that, I also would like to remind you that we welcome any question you may have through the use of the interactive tool Slido. You should have instructions on screen soon in order to understand how to ask your questions. And then after a short moderated discussion, we will hopefully dive into the many questions you have. And now, without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to Simonetta for some opening remarks from her side. Thank you, Simonetta.
Okay, working? Good, great. So, good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. And as the president of IAF was mentioning this morning, it's really the first time that we get back, not all together, but at least quite a substantive group of people in person. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be in this venue with the next generation of leaders. So briefly about myself, well, I'm the director of the Office for Outer Space Affairs at the United Nations. I've been working in the fields now, unfortunately, I mean, if I look at my age or at my experience, 35 years now, and I started national level with the Italian Space Agency. I went regional with the European Space Agency and the Commission, and then global starting beginning of 2014 with the United Nations, which means that I really have quite a broad understanding of what is going on in space, what was going on, what is going on, and what will go on in space activities. And I really, we at the UN, we have special attention to a lot of different angles, how to build in particular the future of of the workforce, but also to look at how we can support better and better, in particular in developing and emerging countries, the the attention to STEM education and how STEM fields can really help for sustainable development. I'm an astrophysicist by education, so in a way I can say that I've been in space since now 40 years, not in space, but in space. And I was also, looking for some space at the very beginning, so I really wanted to find a field when I was young, which could have supported me throughout my career in my desire of learning and my desire of getting more and more acquainted with the future, with innovative and disruptive practices in approaches. So what I've done is exactly what I wanted, even if at the very beginning I didn't know what I really wanted. What I wanted was, I want to learn, I want to be part of a process that can help the world to build a better future. And that's what I'm doing, so I'm quite privileged, if I may say so. In short, because I know that you will look at me even if I'm not, I believe that what is really important, two main messages that I believe are extremely, to the point here in this audience. First of all, that what we do need is diversity of any kind. And the second one is because diversity is an asset, even if sometimes we may feel discriminated here and there for different reasons during our career path. And we can discuss this later if you want a little bit. And the other element is international cooperation. Anything cannot be done. Really, we cannot do anything without international cooperation, without cooperating on all the steps, and in particular in space, if we want to, as I said, be the change we want to see, in a way, really change the future for a better result, because we have so many challenges to tackle, and only together we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simonetta. Very inspiring words, and I couldn't agree more on the value and importance of international cooperation. And on that, we have to remind ourselves that, together we can only go further. So this is why the title of our panel discussion is very importantly focused on international cooperation. And on this topic, I would like to turn to Dr. Sergei for some personal introduction. If you could briefly introduce yourself and your connection with space exploration, sustainability. Obviously, that could be pretty obvious, but how your path led you to your position, because to become a symbol like you are, it is not that easy. And so maybe the young generation could be inspired by hearing your story in a few minutes. Thank you.
Уважаемые друзья, уважаемые коллеги, мне очень приятно приветствовать вас в этом историческом здании и в этом прекрасном городе.
Dear friends and dear colleagues, I am very happy to welcome you in this historical hall.
И сегодня здесь собралась молодежь, которая будет продолжать те космические исследования, которые начались до нас, которые проводили мы и которые будут, естественно, продолжаться дальше.
And today, the young people gathered here who would continue our job of explorations which had begun earlier, which are happening at the moment, and for sure will continue in future.
На первых этапах развития космической программы каждая страна, каждая держава делала свои исследования самостоятельно, развитие техники велось самостоятельно, но уже на первом этапе стало понятно, что сотрудничая вместе, мы можем достигнуть гораздо большего.
At the first stage of explorations, every country, every power was trying to explore, to conduct the explorations, relying on their own resources. But after a while, it became evident that if we cooperate, if we put together our efforts, then we will be able to achieve much more.
И, наверное, хорошим примером такого сотрудничества явилась программа «Союз Аполлон», которая позволила создать технические средства, позволяющие стыковку, позволила специалистам найти общий язык для того, чтобы обеспечить эту общую стыковку. И впервые была совершена стыковка корабля «Аполлон» и корабля «Союз» в космосе в 1975 году.
And one great example of such a cooperation was the joint program called Soyuz Apollo, where two spaceships were docked in the outer space, and it became possible to create the necessary technical appliances and to find the common language in order to ensure this undertaking.
И с точки зрения космонавтов, те не только профессиональные, но и личные отношения, которые возникли в процессе вот этой совместной работы, продолжались потом много лет, и для нас, для следующего поколения, являлись примером того, как вот эти отношения между Алексеем Леоном и Томом Стаффордом продолжались на протяжении многих лет.
And not only professional relations, but also personal relations arose between the cosmonauts, and they continued for many years. Like a very good example of such cooperation and such relations is the contacts between Alexei Leonov and the American cosmonaut
Том Стаффорд. И я хочу сказать, что на тот момент технические специалисты общались в основном для того, чтобы обеспечить техническую возможность этой стыковки. Но вот сейчас здесь я вижу очень много своих друзей и коллег, с которыми мы вместе тренировались, с которыми мы вместе летали, наших международных партнеров, с которыми мы начали полеты тогда еще на станции «Мир».
And of course, mainly the technical specialists had to maintain their contacts in order to provide the technical side of the cooperation. But at the moment, I see a lot of my colleagues here with whom we were training together at the first stages of our exploration programs.
И общение между программами стало гораздо более плотным. Это было не только общение космонавтов между собой, но и общение специалистов, ученых. И на борту станции «Мир» мы проводили очень много интересных экспериментов, совместно поставленных, которые организовывались большими группами специалистов на Земле с разных стран.
And not only the cosmonauts established such a good communication and cooperation with each other, but also the scientists and the specialists, and we were able to stage many interesting and large experiments on the soil of different countries.
И сейчас, работая по программе Международной космической станции, наше общение стало еще более плотным. Мы вместе управляем станцией, центры управления находятся на постоянной связи друг с другом. Ученые вместе проводят эксперименты и вместе обрабатывают результаты. И вот такое сотрудничество становится все более плотным не только на уровне вот как бы верхушки программы, но и сами программы становятся более интегрированными.
And in relation to the International Space Station, such a cooperation became even even closer. And now our specialists and our scientists, they work together while controlling the space station, and also it happens not only on the top of the program, on the top level of the program, where it is necessary to control the station, but also within the various programs related to the station.
Поэтому, говоря про будущее, про то будущее, которое вы будете продолжать, приходя дальше в космическую программу, я уверен, что оно будет еще более интегрированным. Это позволяют современные средства связи, это позволяют возможности, которые есть сейчас для организации научных экспериментов, для создания новой техники. И поэтому я думаю, что следующий этап развития космонавтики, пилотируемой космонавтики, будет еще более интегрирован, чем те, которые были раньше.
And I'm sure that the next stage of development of the joint efforts in this in space explorations will be even the integration will increase, will develop, because now we have a lot of communication aids and a lot of new equipment. Would be possible to create a lot of new equipment to provide even closer integration, closer cooperation in that field.
Поэтому, мне кажется, очень важно в рамках той конференции, которую мы проводим сейчас, ну, может быть, познакомиться друг с другом, может быть, обменяться в процессе докладов какими-то мыслями и идеями, позадавать друг другу вопросы, и я уверен, что те контакты, которые вы установите сейчас здесь, на этой конференции, помогут вам вместе создавать новое космическое будущее. Спасибо за внимание.
And during our conference right now, you can establish new contacts, you can get acquainted with each other, you can exchange new thoughts and ideas, and I'm sure that the relations that you will create during this conference will help you to promote the future of the space exploration as well.
Thank you very much, Sergey, for such thoughtful remarks. And I would like to turn now to Hadza Al-Mansouri, the first astronaut from the United Arab Emirates. Hadza, you are a symbol of the new generation and what bright future awaits us. So, few welcoming remarks from you on this topic and on your journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Доброе утро, уважаемые коллеги, дорогие друзья. Для меня это большая честь быть здесь. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really an honor to be here today and to talk about a little bit of a humble experience that I saw through my journey to reach this place here and to share with you my experience in my first flight. I came from a very young country. Believe it or not, our country united in 1971. We are this year celebrating 50 years of our united country. So it is younger than the space flight and younger than this. So imagine we are just younger than a human space flight, and yet we achieve amazing thing in the 50 years. So in 50 years, the United Arab Emirates dreamed to go to space. And for me, when I was a kid, I saw stars and I dreamed that one day I will be an astronaut. But a country like United Arab Emirates, with a very low experience in space, back then in the 90s, when I decided to go to space, it was really something impossible. Because we have no space flights, we have nothing related to space. So whatever. But we have a far vision in the United Arab Emirates, so we decided to build our own capability in space. So we started in 2006 to build our own space agency, our space center, and we decided to work with different countries. We believe that working with different countries will give us a good experience and will push our boundaries even more forward. So we built our own satellites in 2010, and we established our own space human flight program in cooperation with Roscosmos. We launched our first flight in 2019. I was in that flight going to space with my colleague, Commander Oleg Skoropichka, and NASA astronaut Jessica Meir. It was amazing when I got space. When I went to space, it was really something that I share it with my people back home, with the young generation. It's really something important to tap on this subject through these events and these conferences here and in different places, because it's really important to tell everyone that through international cooperation, through collaboration from different countries, we can achieve amazing things. And this year also, we successfully established our first orbiter around Mars. It successfully reached Mars and now taking pictures for the whole scientific community all around the world. So we couldn't do all of this without international cooperation, without young minds and young engineers in different places, collaboration with different agencies from different countries. We couldn't do all of this. So it's really important to work together because despite our background, our beliefs, when it comes to space exploration, is the one thing that will always unite us. Because we're looking for what we are speaking one common language, which is science. And that's the important thing. So looking forward to meet each one here and participate in this conference, to share with them our humble experience and to give them advices, because they are the continuation of this space exploration. So in future, we will see one of you guys participated in different things in space, from building rockets, a new technology, or building a new policy, because we are looking to go beyond the low orbit, and to go beyond that, we need new things, a new mind, a fresh mind. So that's the important thing. So hopefully through these conferences, we can thrive and learn more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Haza. I think your story is a great inspiration, as well as the Hope mission of the UAE has really inspired us through international cooperation. And so it is really great to have you, as well as all the other speakers. And I would like to turn now to Julie Patarin-Josek for some opening remarks from one member of the young generation to another. Julie.
Yeah, thank you. Am I really supposed to introduce myself after two cosmonauts? Really? Nice, thank you. So I might be the wild card of this plenary because I'm a political science academic. A few years ago, I've defended my PhD research on the role of human space program in the reconstruction of post-Soviet Europe. So I was looking at how the organization of the astronaut training, the international organization of the astronaut training, the coordination or lack of coordination between space industries, and the organization of scientific experiments aboard the International Space Station from the late 1990s have influenced interstate relationships between Western and Eastern European countries. For the Western European part, I was also looking at the development of the European Space Agency in relation with the European Union to see how this very specific way to develop a space Europe have influenced the reorganization of some territories among former Soviet republics, like in Ukraine, for example. To do this research, and I think it's important because that really still today influences the way I conceive space policy and space programs. To do this research, I've interviewed a lot of space agency representatives. A lot of astronauts and cosmonauts who are actually here today also and who will contribute to the conference this week. I also worked with archives because I was interested in looking at a kind of historical sociology of human space flight, which is really important, I think, still today. And I also spend a lot of time inside operation rooms and control centers to study the work of operators, because that's also something critical. If you want to understand how a space program works, you really need to spend some time on the operational side at a micro level of the daily organization of a space program. At the same period for a while, I was also part of the French member state delegation at Corpio Station at the UN-USA, which was really enlightening to understand the kind of manufacture of space strategies from a top-down perspective and the daily redefinition of peaceful uses of outer space. So to a certain extent, my work is very similar to an engineer's, because if you want to understand how a computer works, you might need to deconstruct it to see which piece goes where, what its role in the whole mechanism. And I do it actually the same for space policy and state structure, to try to understand how we came to conceive space exploration as we do today, according to a specific organization, institutional framework, social norms, and so on. So again, just a few words on my background and my relationship with space exploration or international relations in the field of space exploration. More recently, I've been developing research projects on related topics, like, for instance, the current internationalization of Russian cosmonaut training methods in space, in emerging spacefaring nations, and also using visual art-based methods, which I think it's of interest for some students maybe here. So using, for instance, photography or documentary filmmaking to try to develop new formats, narratives, new ways to engage with or circulate academic knowledge about space programs. And so for the past 3 years, I've been teaching here at St. Petersburg State University, while also developing international working groups, either in the field of space affairs or international relations. And this is how last year I ended up being the founding chair for the IAF Technical Committee on Space Habitats, which actually gathers a few of our panelists, and which gathers an interdisciplinary team to critically reflect on sustainable space habitations as part of future Moon, orbital, and Mars programs. So I'm really looking forward to further discuss this topic of sustainability and international cooperation, and also as part of working group session this afternoon with all of you, or those of you who will also join us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. It is great to hear so many diverse and inspiring stories of space exploration and space careers. And as a member of the IF Space Habitat Committee, I want to thank you for your chairmanship and your great work there. I would like now to turn to Priyanka Das for her story and her journey. Priyanka, thank you for being with us.
Spasiba. So I'm extremely honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me for this panel. And I would like to introduce myself with the term diversity, because from the professional front, I'm an artist and also an aerospace engineer, and just had my PhD, so no longer a PhD student, so a doctor now. And otherwise, I'm an Indian origin French citizen, and I'm very, very, very interested in the topic of space exploration through international collaboration. I have been part of the artistic scene in space through initiatives such as ITICUS, the IAF Technical Committee for the Cultural Utilization of Space with the IAF, through the SGAC as well, and also the International Lunar Exploration Working Group. And if you're interested, I have two papers on Wednesday, one on art and one on international collaboration through the Asia-Pacific region, and how it is an upcoming scene, and what are the challenges, what needs to be done, and what has already been done through the EPIC region. And I am looking forward to discussing with all of you over all these subjects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and sorry for the, for the misunderstanding, but congratulations also on your PhD. And last but not least, I would like to turn to Ignati for some few words. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully the microphone is working. I am Ignacio Marcinigovski. I am a British software engineer that has had the pleasure of working in Darmstadt in Germany for the past 2 years. I originally graduated with a, thank you. I originally graduated with a bachelor's degree in mathematics and computer science, and have afterwards had the pleasure of attending the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. My original interest in space and space exploration stems from a childhood spent reading novels by Stephen Hawking and attending lectures at the Royal Society. Over the course of university, I decided that I wanted to find my place in the space industry, and I was very lucky to get a studentship from the European Space Agency at the International Space University. This experience at ISU has changed my professional life, as I wanted to originally be an academic, but I was introduced to the wide range of fields in the space industry as well as the space community at large. And this allowed me to become part of the industry's space research. My overall research and professional interests have led me to many fields: avionics, Earth observation data, embedded software development, and even hydroponics. I believe that there are a lot of problems and technologies that will shape the future of the space sector. There are currently, in the decade ahead of us, going to be many challenges, as well as many interesting developments and changes. We can see them already with a large number of probes launched to Mars, to the point that even the space nerd that I am still hesitant to think that I will remember all the successful Mars missions of the past 5 or 10 years. Similarly, with a number of space agencies committing to make lunar exploration once again a serious reality, there's going to be a lot of interesting things, both for the current generation of space scientists, engineers, and explorers, as well as those who will be joining us in the space field in the next 10 and 20 years. And I believe a lot of the decisions we'll be making today will be crucial to shaping our way forwards, both as a species as well as a civilization on not a Earth scale, but a cislunar or even solar system scale. Over my experience at the International Space University, and ever since, I have had the pleasure and opportunity of discussing all sorts of topics with all sorts of folk from different backgrounds, different cultures, and different generations. I stayed for a year in the same house as an Omani army major. I have discussed topics of philosophy with a Greek surgeon, and I have discussed the technicalities of signal processing with Chinese engineers. One of the biggest takeaways for me from all of these interactions has been that there is a lot of ways of looking at the same problem and describing the same problem. And these will be based a lot on where you come from, what your experience has been. There's this concept of Umwelt in science, in that in the same ecosystem, you will have multiple different species that will have a completely different perception of the world. And it is the same whenever any sort of large cooperation project takes place. And what I've found personally is that once you are able to see past those differences of perspective on things, there's a lot of important information that you can glimpse from this, both for yourself as well as for whatever project you're currently working on. And I believe that this is probably one of the most important things since for the past 50 years there's been a lot of collaboration between nations, between different organizations, and between different people in the field of space exploration. I would like to end on mentioning something from Mr. Al-Mansouri's speech, in that he very aptly put it that underneath all the differences, there is this one common language of science and of engineering, which is effectively imposed on us by the universe as it is. And through it, no matter the misunderstanding or the difficulties in communication, a certain common ground can always be gained, because science is independent of all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ignati, and I couldn't agree more on the importance of emphasizing the role of science, but also on one word that you mentioned, which is ecosystem, which I think could come back handy when we're going to discuss sustainability, because if you think about it, an ecosystem is a circular environment where all the pieces fit together into a broader perspective and a long-term perspective, right? Which is the core of sustainability. And so let's begin our discussion with this very topic. And I want just to say one thing on a methodological level. I hope this will be as interactive as possible. So I would like to invite all the speakers, whenever I throw a topic, to just unmute themselves and speak. So I will direct the question first to one of you, and then if you want to comment or respond, just feel free to interact, so that we try to keep this as active and interactive as possible. And I also would like to ask the organizers to show once more the instructions to ask questions through Slido, so that everybody in the room has an opportunity as well to begin thinking about their questions. And so, we are here to discuss sustainability, but one of the things that we never actually discuss is, what do we mean with this term? What sustainability entails? And it could be many things. And so I would like to begin with Hamza. I would like to ask you, what does sustainability mean for you? For me, it's having an holistic approach, this ecosystem that Ignati mentioned. It means keeping in mind that we're not the only ones, that there will be others after, and that we need to take them into account, or as in space law we would say, to pay due regard to their interest. And so you have been to space recently, and it is famous known that astronauts experience this overview effect, which is the perspective that we are all connected. And I think this is crucial for the topic of sustainability. So how does this relate to your experience as an astronaut? How do you view sustainability, and what do you think we should do to ensure sustainable space exploration?
So I believe sustainability it has different forms. When it comes to space, I think is to maintain that momentum and that energy that I think it is now building up very fast, and it's a huge thing. We can see through the different countries, different agencies, and also different private sector. By enabling private sector to involve more on this, it's giving them more opportunities to participate, and giving more opportunities to the young generation to also to involve their ideas and their thoughts. So it's really exciting times that we see in front of us in terms of human space flights. Different space vehicles is now in front of us, going to the International Space Station, enabling more access for more science from different countries. So I believe it's more to give opportunities for young generation to participate in different aspects, from developing new policies, also from developing new vehicles, new systems, and new equipments that will help us as explorers to explore beyond the low orbit. So in future, we are looking forward to go to the moon, again, going back to the moon, and go beyond that, we need a new technology. So definitely we will do it, and there's new things and new challenges that we have to overcome. And I think through these events, we can go and figure out new ideas. So definitely by enabling different people, different sectors, different agencies, and that will give us a new chances to see and to solve new problems in a different way.
Thank you. Simonetta, I have a specific question now, going into the topic of sustainability, which, as Hessa said, we are going to keep the space environment and preserve it for the future generations. And the crucial issue in this, how are we going to do it? So international cooperation will be crucial, but probably we need to do more, because on Earth, for instance, we haven't done a great job with space debris. And so what lesson can we learn from that case in order to avoid repeating the same mistakes on the Moon and then on Mars?
Well, do you have 24 hours? No, I'm joking. It's quite, on one side, it's a complex situation because the number of stakeholders involved is really high with different requirements, needs, in perspectives. But at the same time, it's also true that what we've been able to achieve under the umbrella of the UN in the past with the treaties and the principles in 2007, also with the space debris mitigation guidelines, is extremely important. It's the foundation of what we have to do in space to really have and show a responsible behavior. At the same time, you probably know that we have been working, member states in particular, on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities, which have been approved now already 2 years ago. And it's just the first set, just quote and unquote, the first set of 21 guidelines. And this is already the basis for a lot of activities that member states are implementing in order to be in line with their decisions. But there are a lot of issues related, first of all, to other areas which are not currently covered through let's say, the bulk of the framework of all the, let's say, international space law, so treaties, principles, and guidelines. So there are areas which are not yet covered. But on top of that, there is a strong connection that I'm really underlining every time I can, which is between the commercial sector and the blooming of the commercial space activities and the regulatory framework. The two things must go hand in hand. And that's the reason why a few years ago I started the process to try to involve more and more others, not only governments, which are my main counterparts in the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in the General Assembly, but also the private sector, academia, NGOs, and among the NGOs, few of them particularly important, but also the civil society, I mean the public, because now space is really at the center, is across the board. Everything you want to do, policy and decision making cannot be done without considering space at the center. And this is a sort of a mantra that I'm trying to push in every occasion I can. I would like to mention that this is also a topic that I'm trying to bring through, let's say, certain important political processes involving top-level spacefaring countries, because on one side, we need to really have the spacefaring countries and the new players at the same time having all a responsible behavior. Because the main issue currently is not with the biggest countries, so the ones who have already absorbed and are implementing all the treaties and the guidelines, but mainly the new players which don't have yet the full system in their own countries to follow all the rules and regulations. So my point is, we need to be inclusive, open, we need to bring everyone at the table, and we need to listen to all the requirements and needs. And so we, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, in a way, are a sort of a broker. We put together the various stakeholders, and with a certain success for the time being, but it's still a long way to go.
Thank you, Simonetta. And I think one of the things you mentioned amongst the many interesting points is really inclusiveness, which is crucial, right? Because again, sustainability means having this broader perspective on how the pieces fit together. And so I would like to ask Sergei, Russia is an incredibly advanced spacefaring nation. You have an amazing experience in these technologies. And how do you think a nation like Russia and other spacefaring nations can help others to join this new era of space exploration in order to make it more sustainable, in order to help them fit into the broader exploration puzzle, if you wish?
I think what we are doing now is exactly what you explained. We have a lot of experience, and in the beginning of space era, if you want to do experiment in space, you have to build rocket, you have to build spacecraft, and you need to install this experiment on spacecraft and conduct this experiment. Now, for new countries, new scientists who are going to participate in space experiments, they don't need to build everything. We can share our experience and our knowledge to basically reduce the level of entry into space program. So you don't need to do everything yourself at this point to participate in it. And what recently we talked with our Arab colleagues, that initially to send Gagarin to space or send Shepard to space, country need to build, to develop technology and build rocket, and build spacecraft. Now we can use vehicle of each other to have more access to space. And that's, I think, what Russia and US and Europe actually can do to help other countries to participate in space program.
Thank you. I think the concept of access is really crucial. We want to expand access. And so I want to turn to Ignati. As a software engineer, you may comment maybe on one of the issues, or actually the proposals that have been advanced recently and that could be a key for a more sustainable space exploration, which is this idea of interoperability and shared standards and infrastructure even. Obviously, this is a great thing, but in practice, there may be some bump roads. So like, how do we implement the idea of interoperability in the future of space programs? Do you see any particular obstacles, or the advantages will ultimately be, let's say, outweighing the disadvantages or the difficulties?
Thank you very much. I would like to start with a joke that we've been exchanging a lot at two different places I've happened to work at, which is, let's say there are currently 10 different standards being used within a certain industry for a certain task. We now have a team that wants to standardize them all, to make it all work together seamlessly. And 2 years later, we have 11 standards in common use throughout these industries. This is kind of, I find, one of the bigger challenges probably to overcome when it comes to standardization, at least from a technical perspective. Whether we're talking, I suppose, software, or whether we're talking specific hardware, like, let's say, docking adapters for spacecraft. Since you might argue every time someone makes a new standard, they're reinventing the bicycle. At the same time, there is, many ways of making a functional machine with two wheels that you propel by pedaling. And there are, in my experience, two ways that you can have a field properly standardized from the technical perspective. One would be that there was pretty much a single monopolistic player when the field was first made that's established a lot of these standards. An example would be the units we use today. They kind of stem back to the history of science and the places where a lot of scientific advancements were made at the right time ended up being the one that kind of spread their units of measurements to the rest of the world, which is kind of how we have effectively two systems, the metric one and the imperial one, where the metric one is mostly adopted everywhere, while the imperial one is still in use in a number of countries. And when it comes to standardization, you do need all participants to agree on what they want to use. And this can be made using a set of engineering-style trade-offs where you draw up what are the good sides of each standard, what are the bad sides of each standard, and find some sort of common ground. But once again, this does require cooperation from all sides. I believe when it comes to a lot of fields in the space industry, there's already a lot of common ground and standardization that goes back to, I suppose, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, when the USSR and the USA started cooperating on certain aspects of space exploration. And a lot of these standards have been adopted ever since. At the same time, for newer aspects, for example, the field I'm working in right now, where we are working on a number of things to do with standardization of satellite avionics and reconfiguration systems for satellite avionics. It is a little bit of a free-for-all, in that every mission will have some standard that it adheres to. And it is my personal expectation that this will just this is a case of a self-stabilizing process. So to give a physics analogy, it's like we have a ball that's slowly going into a circular hole. It's rolling around the edges, but you can see at every rotation it's a little bit deeper into the hole, and eventually it's going to reach the bottom, at which point there's going to be 1 to 5 different standards that are going to be accepted pretty much everywhere. The same way in a lot of other large industries, you will have common parts that are used in the same type of equipment. A good example would be USB ports. They're pretty much ubiquitous, but there is a number of different USB ports that are in common use at the same time, yet we still somehow manage to get around and charge our devices and get to the end of the day without running out of battery. I would expect this will be kind of the end point of a lot of standards that are currently developing within the space industry.
Thank you. I know, Simonetta, maybe you wanted to interject on this topic? Okay. Then I will turn then to Julie, because we have heard from Ignati on the technical side of interoperability, right? But then again, to make the pieces fit together, we also need a more of a space policy approach, right? We need to have this cooperation to be put forward among nations and also among new actors that are coming. And I think one of the experiences that we're having in the Space Habitat Committee is exactly how to include these different pieces from a policy perspective. So like, I was wondering if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, maybe some quick remarks because time flies and if you want to cover some other topics. So I'm actually planning to discuss this about coordination and cooperation. So to talk about sustainability, I would just follow up on remarks that have already been mentioned by others and talk about a very specific topic, which is space debris and how we can manage space debris mitigation and this kind of very hot topic. So space debris is typically a topic for which obviously you need international cooperation and coordination, and so de facto this is typically a topic for which the UNOSA is a vital component because it allows you to have a platform for interstate discussions while it's not always very easy to organize at the scale of inter-space agency relationships. On the other hand, it's also typically a topic for which you really need some specific state to discuss, take a seat and have a serious talk. I'm thinking, for instance, about the United States and China, who are the two biggest producers of space debris. So in order to manage this kind of topic related to sustainability in future space exploration, obviously you need international discussion, but you also need the countries which are the more involved in specific areas, like, for instance, space debris, to coordinate with each other, despite possible restrictions at the national scale, like it's the case for the US and China in terms of, for instance, legal restrictions to cooperate. So it's a tricky question, and yeah, again, you need to look at different scales of cooperation and try to go beyond national restrictions to do this. And yeah.
Thank you. And broadening even more our perspective and focusing also on the role of the young generation in promoting sustainable exploration, aside, obviously, the importance of cooperation, I'd like to turn to Priyanka because you have an artistic background, right? And I think art could be so important to inspire the new generations to jump in and to catalyze this discussion that sometimes we don't really know how to express until an artist come and here we go. Then we finally find an enabler for better discussions.
Well, I think there's an artist inside every one of you. You just have to allow yourselves to express yourselves. So art has always been a part of human culture since ancient society. It's what encouraged people to draw on the cave walls. It was the basis of what led us to develop writing. So, and even today, if you, Thomas Pesquet took his saxophone to the ISS, I mean, it costs a lot per kilogram to send anything to space. So art has been always it's something that you cannot really ignore, and I think that we need a lot of platforms to give artists an opportunity to express themselves, not just painting, but in music, art, theater, anything, and all of these media so through art you can also you can encourage people for collaborations. For example, recently we had this event with the Space Generation Advisory Council called Argent Leap, which is for encouraging women in aerospace and to tackle the issue of how, I see that it's also one of the questions, how to break the stereotype for women in the space industry. And through this event, we launched a call for artwork, and we received so many artworks from India, from Africa, from the United States. And through these artworks, you could sort of delve into what the situation of the space industry is in each of these individual countries and regions. And it was another, I mean, I could keep speaking about this for hours, but then if you have an artwork in front of you, you just have to look at it for 5 minutes and you know what it's trying to convey. And for me, personally, I would say I'm an artist with a scientific brain, and it's what's always encouraged me to keep looking for different ways of expressing myself as an artist in the space industry. And I've already received so much feedback about how you can have, you can use space for expressing yourselves, for interacting with local communities, etc. For example, there's the Moon Gallery project as well, which is aiming to send a little gallery of artwork to the moon. And there's going to be an exhibition this week at St. Petersburg. If you're interested, I can give you more information later on. And all of these, yeah, so through art you can use it as a means not just to talk about your technical progress, but also what are different kinds of, what are different challenges that are faced by society, to bring to light all of these different topics. And yeah, it's a powerful medium of expression.
Thank you very much. I think it's very well said. Artists and art help us broadening the discussion on space to the global community. And speaking of community, I would like to ask, yes, to show the questions on screen. So thank you so much. We already have more than 30 questions, so this is wonderful. Thank you for your engagement. It will be difficult to go through all of them, but we will try our best. I would like to begin with the first one, which is also, I would say, very connected to what we've been just discussing. For a long time, space exploration has been the domain of states and state activities. Now, over the last 10 to 20 years, we have commercial space flight, we have commercial space industry, and so how do we transition from that very state-oriented type of exploration, type of discussions, in all levels, technical, but also political and diplomatic, obviously, to involving new actors which have different mentalities, different mindsets. I could ask this question to all of you. I don't know if there's specifically one that would like to take it. Simonetta, I see you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's linked to what I said already. That is the right time to try to involve all the stakeholders in trying really to listen to all the requirements and needs, which are different but need to be converging. Otherwise, we cannot preserve space for future generation, and it's impossible then to develop what we call a commercial safe space, which is let's say, the mantra again that we are using in all our political discussions. What I would like to mention is that the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, we currently have 95 member states. Just a few years ago, when I started when I took up duty as director, we were 76, so we had an increase of a little bit more than 20%, which is quite high if you consider that it's quite a let's say, a long process. But this year we have already additional 4 applications, which, if nothing happens from now until August, when we will have the next Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space session, we will become 99. I'm working to celebrate the 100, as you can imagine. Still, we are half of the way, because you have 193 member states in the United Nations. So, but getting better and better. Having states at the table is key, because, you know, each commercial company in the world has to get the license from its own country. And so it's when you have everything regulated at state level, then everything is regulated. But what is important again is to have all the stakeholders at the table able really to express their views, and so that we can then transfer this information in an informed manner to member states. That's what is happening right now, quite with a certain success, I have to say, but there's again a long way to go.
Indeed, it's a long way to go. Sergei, you wanted to also comment on this?
Let me say a few words. I think there are several topics in this question. One is about space flyers who are going to pay money to go to space. And I think that's what we see for last several years, actually several decades already. And I think it's normal, it probably will exist in the future. But I think from mainstream, from exploration point of view, I think commercial flight will go behind frontier anyway. Second topic is about commercial industry that provides space flight. And I think in this case, we see some kind of misunderstanding, because from very beginning, companies that provide industrial parts for space flight were commercial. Some company that built bolts, I don't know, for rocket, they were commercial from very beginning. And when we are talking about difference between modern companies that are commercial and companies that exist a long time ago, we forget that Boeing is also a commercial company. Energia, that is main company that built human space flight, human spacecrafts, it's also a commercial company for several decades already. So it's basically a question of terminology. And I think, generally speaking, commercial company will come to space exploration, to space flights after we reduce the risk. And risky programs, some exploration will be done and probably should be done by government, because only when we can assess the risk. And when we are able to calculate risk, commercial company will come, and that's kind of normal path of exploration.
Thank you, and I absolutely agree. The element of the risk is one of the crucial parts that we need to reduce so that then commercial companies can engage. And there are many types of risk also, not just technical risk, but also legal risk. What is the legal status of certain activities, like with space resources, for instance? It is critical that we eliminate the uncertainty so that we can improve the participation of private sector. I want to ask another question on this, specifically to Hamza, because another element, as Sergei also mentioned, is the private spaceflight industry, right? Usually, astronauts has always been trained in being part of space state programs. Now we will have private astronauts and maybe one-day tourists. So from the perspective of a young, new astronaut, do you think things will change? Do you think these people will be different than you are going there for a private entity or even as tourists? Or do you think fundamentally certain things will remain the same?
I believe so. It's gonna change. Definitely, it's gonna change in future. But we have to walk it thoroughly and mindfully through this whole process, because involving more private sector on space exploration is really important. But on the other hand, we have to build the new policies and new regulations to make it more controlled and more efficient. Because if anything goes wrong, it's going to be a catastrophic problem for everyone, and it will affect everyone on this sector. I think as an end user, as astronauts and cosmonauts, we are really looking forward to have more vehicles going to space and to have more technology on that matter, but we have to have it in a very deliberate and very controlled way, so that it's gonna serve us for a long term, and it's gonna help the space exploration, human space exploration, a sustainable program for everyone.
Absolutely. Obviously, safety goes first. We need to remind that space is difficult and dangerous, and so private participation is welcome as long as we do not lower the standards. And I think there was a question from my dear friend Hamza Ahmed on the role of standard setters and international organization. I don't know if any of the speakers would like to comment. Ignati? Please try to speak close to the mic. Great.
Yes. So when it comes to standard settlers, I want to give kind of two perspectives here. An engineer's perspective, as well just a everyday person's that wants to be involved in the space industry's perspective. So from an engineering side, standards are quite important when it comes to making a new project, whether you're designing a spacecraft, a rocket, or a piece of software, honestly. There's certain things that if you know that other people in industry are adhering to them, you are able to kind of build parts that will match together with their parts without needing to closely work together. And the bigger an industry is, the more players there are in it, the more important this is. I have seen over my relatively short career kind of the effects of this both in the software industry in general as well as in the space industry, in that always things start as a little bit of a Wild West, where everyone is coming up with their own things, they're developing their project, and this works at a certain scale, when everyone has the time to deal with projects on a one-by-one case. Eventually, when you start having, hundreds of thousands of different entities cooperating or working on what effectively ends up being a single supply line or a single production chain for something, it becomes important to have third parties that make sure that certain standards are adhered to. This, of course, is very important just from an engineer perspective, but it's also insanely important from a safety perspective. You want to have standards for safety of your astronauts. You want to have standards for safety of your space tourists. You want to have standards for safety of the engineers working on the actual hardware. And this is one of the things where it's very important to have these things kind of managed externally, I find, by independent agencies. Probably one of the hottest topics for the next decade is going to be around space debris. There are already international agencies kind of managing orbital allocations, especially when it comes to geostationary orbit, which is already quite cluttered. And it's going to be very important that either those agencies stay as a central reference point for whenever someone is designing a mission, to make sure that they're not going to hit anyone, they're not going to interfere with someone else's satellite, and also to make sure that they dispose of their satellite at end of life properly. As from a let's say, a external perspective, the perspective of a space enthusiast, it's always very important to kind of have a perspective, to be able to see that the field internally seems to be quite a tight-knit, well-managed well-managed thing. Let's put it this way: if you're a paying space tourist or a passenger going on some sort of important mission, doing your experiments, you want to be able to rely on not only the manufacture of your spacecraft, but on the fact that the way that spacecraft is made, if it says it's, you know, adherent to this particular safety standard, that you can trust them. And as more and more different players join, this is going to become increasingly important, especially when it comes to private players who might not have not just the same sort of level of scientific and engineering oversight from thousands of experts, the best of their country, but also who might not have the same level of financing to quadruple and quintuple check everything. It's going to be important that someone makes sure these things are done, as some of the worst, I suppose, accidents in space history have usually come from lapse in standards, where it was decided that, for this particular case, we'll let this and this slide because it's never been a problem before. And once again, this is something where I believe external oversight, be it by international organizations or within a specific nation or in some other way, is quite crucial.
Thank you, Gennady. And I would like to pause for 1 second the discussion on the international cooperation, the standard, to also enlighten another aspect, which Christian mentioned before, the 3 Gs. I think we've talked about the generation, we've talked about the geography, but we also need to think about gender. And there was a question before, specifically directed to Julie and Priyanka, but obviously any of the speakers is free to comment, which is, how do you break a wall of stereotypes in space as a woman, and especially a woman in engineering? I think this is important to discuss, because if we want to achieve a bright future in space exploration and we want to mark a new era, we also need to do better in terms of gender. And so if you have any comments on this, either of you, I think it will be crucial, definitely.
So who should start? Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So that's a big question, but as you may know, you have gender stereotypes everywhere. I mean, in different fields and sectors of activity. No, space engineering might be a specific case, but I'm not able to talk about it because I'm not an engineer myself. As I said, I'm a political scientist, whereas you also have gender stereotypes. Anyway, but this is actually something I wanted to emphasize on at some point, because when we talk about new generation and the stakes for the future leader of the space field and this kind of issue, there is of course the question of gender diversity among other kind of diversity. And as many of you already know, because you are yourself involved in this kind of promoting activities, of course, interesting young girls to STEAMs and this kind of disciplines is absolutely vital for the space field. But it's also equally important, I think, to encourage young girls and women to be more active in processes of decision making and other kind of position, including high-level positions in the space field. You know, to have more women leading space agencies like we have in Canada, or this kind of new stake that we should really embrace in the coming decades. I'm not sure it's really the place to discuss how gender stereotypes work, although I'm actually able to discuss this. Well, you have various reasons for this, of course. Mostly are structural kind. It means that it's not only on an individual basis, obviously, but the social structure of many fields are actually organized in such a way that specific people are less legitimate than others, or have to fight more than others to take responsibilities, or to get responsibilities, to be heard, and so on. And it's not only about gender, but also about sexual identities, for instance, or disability. So again, the real stake here is to really reflect on how we can further encourage diversification of any kind in the space sector. But again, not only in the engineering part, which is very important, but at every scale and every stage of a space program, including on the side of politics and decision making.
Thank you. And I think we have a great example here. Simonetta, as the director of UNUSA, is certainly a symbol of how we can do great things when we're led by a woman.
Well, yeah, this is quite a complex argument, if I may. Well, if you ask me, you've been discriminated in your career? Yes. Did you have any episode that you can report about being discriminated? Yes. You've been discriminated because you are a woman, because you were younger of others, and I mean other participants to a meeting. This was true mainly at the beginning of my career. Or because I'm Italian? Yes. However, I believe that this should not be the main topic. The main topic is, in my personal opinion, that since I'm against any type of discrimination, I'm also against, sorry to be so straightforward, I'm also against quota. I'm against what we call the positive discrimination, but simply because I'm against discrimination. I believe that what we should do is to put in place a system which looks at the merit. And if this works, then there is not an issue anymore of gender, of geography, of age, or anything. I have to say that I'm quite privileged because in the UN the situation is extremely well managed. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's very well managed. In other organizations I've been and having also important responsibilities in the past, well, that's not true. But I hope that there will be, an approach to try to solve these problems. And in my case, has never been a showstopper. So I believe we have just to trust ourselves and try to do our best to express, to show the merit that we have, the knowledge that we have of the topic, and also the fact that in reality there is no difference between men and women, young, old. It's just a question of being the right person with the right profile at the right place.
Very well said. I think culture of merit is what we want to accomplish. Priyanka.
So well, it's just a joke, but I think the dismal condition of women in the space industry is what pushed me towards art. But apart from that, I agree that discrimination it's a hot topic, and it's a very sensitive topic. And if you really want to encourage the young generation, the new generation, we could start with something as simple as updating our vocabulary, such as crewed and not manned missions. And if you want to encourage young girls, young boys, and just tell them that, yes, it's going to be merit-based from now on, and not because of how you look, where you're from, what your parents did, for example. I think it's very important that the space industry today set in place these guidelines in their internal structure, in their hiring process, in their outreach, in everything. And yes, so crewed and not manned.
Thank you, absolutely. Our language defines who we are, and so in a way it is very important that we try to correct our vocabulary in the proper term. Also because this is also another thing. Being a space lawyer, I remember that the exploration and use of outer space shall be the province of all humankind. And so really the element of diversity was there from the very beginning. It was there because everyone is aware that to do something so difficult as space, we need contribution from all humankind. We cannot let everyone behind. And I think how to achieve that is obviously a very difficult question. But as I mentioned before, science as a unifying theme. And I think this is what worked so far so well with the International Space Station. And so being there, united by science, without any national borders, with so many nationalities, how did it feel, and what lesson can we learn from that as we plan for the future of sustainable space exploration?
Yes, just before tapping on this subject, I want to talk about the female part and how it's in our country how be treated. We have been fortunate with our leadership there in the UAE, giving the equal rights for both genders. And to talk about the space sector, in Mohammed Barash Space Center in BRC, we have more than 80% of the engineers from female part. I think that's because they are maybe smarter, definitely. And also, recently we selected the 2 astronauts. One of them is female, and she's really gonna train soon with NASA in the beginning of the year with the ASCAN next year. So we are giving the opportunity for everyone. And as mentioned earlier, it is not the gender that rule us, but our minds and our rules in this life. How we can contribute more, despite our gender or our backgrounds. That's the important thing. And when I went to space, I worked with astronauts and cosmonauts, and one of them is Christina Koch. She spent 1 year, almost 1 year in space. She came back with a full health, with no problem. So definitely, there is no differences between anyone. You have to have the health and the capabilities to do the task that you have been given in a proper way, despite your gender or whatever. So from my humble experience on board the station, I worked with Russians, Americans, and also with the ESA astronaut Luca Parmitan, and I felt really like home on board the station. We are working together in a harmony, in a very like a family environment. We didn't feel that we are coming from different countries. Yes, we are speaking different languages, we have different culture, different traditions, but eventually on board the station, we are working together as one family, as humankind, to have one goal and one objective, to research, to develop a new technology, to discover and to explore new things that will help us here on ground and also to explore deep space. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Hamza. I think this was really inspiring. And it gives me let's say, the opening to begin closing our event. This was a very interesting, I hope, thoughtful and engaging discussion. We got so many questions, and I'm very sorry for all the questions that we couldn't tackle, but I hope in our discussion we addressed the most important points that you had in mind for sustainable space exploration, on the importance of international cooperation and coordination, which goes into collaboration, and obviously on the importance of the young generation. And I think hearing today perspectives of established young professionals, but also young space professionals, such as the wonderful speaker that we had, give us a gist of how diverse and rich is the space community in terms also of the different contributions that we can provide coming from different ages. So I hope this was the message that we try to convey, that ultimately, as Asa said, hopefully our exploration of space can continue in this way, because I think we are starting from a much better place than other domains, than other fields where on Earth we are divided. Because of the imagination that space has connected, because of the difficulties, it somehow still connects us beyond our differences. And I think programs like the ISS and events like this are the best proof of this. And so with that, I would like to thank all of you. Thanks all the speakers for their wonderful interventions. I think we learned a lot, and we thank you for your time. I would like to thank all the audience in the room and online for their wonderful questions and for their attention. I also would like to remind one thing before giving the floor to Christian for closing, that we are going to resume the activities of the Next Generation Day in the afternoon after the lunch break. When you registered as a young professional, you should have received a card with your working group and hopefully also a room where you can find your working group. If you haven't received it, please find Emma from the IF or go to the IF booth, and they will be delighted to help you. It is very important that you find it, and hopefully we will see you at 3. I hope these discussions have been useful for the chairs of the working group to prepare their afternoon. They will divide based on the 6 topics that we have discussed today. So they will go and discuss sustainable exploration, international cooperation, intergenerational balance, global coordination, new space, and benefit sharing. And then each of those groups will then report right after in the plenary closing session, when then we will have the pleasure of hearing some concluding remarks from Pascal Herrenfraund, the president of the IF. That was all from my side. Thank you once more. I was delighted to be moderating this event, and I'll be delighted to see you later. Chris, floor is yours for some closing comments.
Thank you very much, Antonino, for the great moderation, and a big thanks to all the speakers here, and I would like to invite you to give another round of applause to them. That brings us really to the end of this plenary, and you are now free to enjoy the lunch outside. And as Antonino said, please be back at just before 1400, just before 2 o'clock at the working group rooms you have been assigned to. And as was said, Emma can help you to find the right working group room if you have any doubts. Thank you very much, and see you then later in this room again for the closing ceremony.